Mom, why did you bring Grandma here? You know she and Dad never got along. Now that she's here, he'll never want to come home. And besides, she has this strange smell that makes me not even want to stay in the house. Those words from Adam cut through me like a blade, each syllable a wound to the woman who had endured more than a lifetime's worth of hardship. My mother, Dorothy Howard, had carried strength on her shoulders for decades, but in that moment her face fell. The pain in her eyes impossible to mask. I felt her trembling hand in mine, and I held it tighter, forcing myself to meet the gaze of the boy I had raised for 18 years. A thin smile curved my lips, but it carried no warmth. "Then don't stay here anymore," I whispered, my voice cold enough to freeze him where he stood. The words stunned even me, but I knew I could no longer allow his disrespect to fester. My past life had taught me this brutal lesson. After years of struggle, I had finally gained the independence and financial freedom I needed to bring my mother to live with me, to care for her the way she had cared for me. Yet fate had mocked me. On the very day I went to bring her home, the brakes on my car failed, sending me spiraling into the abyss. My body was shattered, my life extinguished in an instant. Only after death did I learn the cruel truth. The man I once called my husband, Michael Bennett, had despised the idea of my mother living with us. He, the man I believed to be patient and gentle, had hidden knives behind his smiles. His first love was carrying his child, while I was still clinging to him with blind devotion. And Adam, my own son, was manipulated into deceiving my mother, convincing her to hand over every share and asset I had left in her care. With that wealth secured, Michael declared Dorothy senile and abandoned her in a decrepit nursing home, where she wasted away in cold and hunger, unloved, unwanted, and betrayed by those she trusted most. That was the tragic end of her life, and mine as well. But fate had given me another chance. In this new life, reborn with memories of all that treachery, I swore I would never allow such cruelty to repeat itself. Tonight at 9 o'clock, I returned to the Bennett mansion in Beverly Hills with my mother by my side. The polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, but the air was heavy with tension. Michael sat there waiting, dressed in a flawless black suit, his legs crossed with an air of practiced authority. He looked at me with surprise, as though he still couldn't believe I had survived. Yet when his gaze fell upon my mother, his expression shifted into one of disdain and mockery. Back so soon? Was the drive comfortable? His lips curved in a polite smile, but his eyes were sharp, cold, filled with the irritation he barely bothered to hide. And tellingly, he didn't even attempt to call Dorothy Mom. On his wrist glistened a luxury watch worth more than a modest family home, while my mother sat beside me in clothes that were worn and inexpensive. She shifted uncomfortably, instantly sensing his rejection, instinctively lowering her head. Dorothy had always been proud and resilient. She lost my father in her middle years and shouldered the burden of raising me alone, working endless hours at grueling jobs just to keep food on the table and to put me through school. Her sacrifices allowed me to attend one of the best universities, then pursue graduate degrees. Through it all, she never complained, never intruded on my decisions. Only once did she hesitate the first time I brought Michael home to meet her. That evening, she took me aside and whispered, "Juliette, he may seem like a good man, but I'm not sure he will be a good husband. There's too much hidden behind his eyes." I didn't understand then. Naive and blinded by love, I repeated her words to Michael, not realizing the damage I had done. He listened with a serene expression, then embraced me gently, promising he would always treat me well. But from that day forward, subtle barbs slipped into his remarks, painting my mother as greedy, small-minded, and manipulative. Over the years, his quiet poison, coupled with the distance that came from my demanding career, created a rift between me and Dorothy. That rift grew into a chasm, one he exploited until my mother was left isolated and defenseless. Not this time. Not in this life. As I took my mother's hand and looked at her tired eyes, I whispered softly, "Mom, you've had a long day. Let me have someone take you upstairs to rest." Then I turned my gaze to Michael, who was lounging as though none of this concerned him. My voice sharpened. "Michael, greet my mother." The room went still, heavy silence settling like a suffocating blanket. From upstairs came the sudden slam of a door, followed by a familiar voice, filled with indignation. "Mom, why did you bring Grandma here? You know she and Dad don't get along. Aren't you just making him uncomfortable? And besides, she smells weird. I don't want to live here if she stays." Adam's voice carried down the staircase, laced with the arrogance of youth, but also the disdain that mirrored his father's. My heart ached, but I kept my expression calm, forcing a smile as I gestured for him to come down. When he approached, his defiance written across his face, I raised my hand and struck him hard across the cheek. The sound cracked through the silence, shocking even myself. Adam's eyes widened in disbelief, his hand flying to his stinging face. "You are my son," I said coldly, "and Dorothy Howard is my mother, your grandmother, who taught you to speak to an elder like that. If you don't want to live here, then get out." His shock turned to fury, then confusion, then a simmering hurt that once might have softened me, but not anymore. In my past life, I had caved each time he looked at me with those wounded eyes, each time he pretended to be the victim. This time, my heart was steel. This time, I would not yield. "Did I ever teach you to speak to your elders like that? If you don't want to live in this house, then leave." My voice rang sharp and final, echoing off the polished walls of the mansion. Adam stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. One hand pressed against the cheek I had just struck. In 18 years, I had never raised a hand to him, never crossed that line between discipline and violence, but tonight I did. And I did it without hesitation. For a moment, his face shifted, confusion mingling with rage, until finally it settled into an expression of wounded indignation. In the past, that look would have broken me. I would have softened, pulled him into my arms, soothed away his pain even if he had been in the wrong. But tonight, I felt nothing. My heart was cold, as unyielding as the marble beneath our feet. Seeing that his tears and trembling failed to sway me, Adam spun around his shoulders, rigid, and stormed to the leather sofa, where Michael sat sulking beside his father, like a child retreating to his protector. My husband did not move, did not speak, only adjusted his golden-rimmed glasses with calculated calm. I watched Adam sit down beside him, still pouting, his defiance burning in his eyes as though daring me to strike him again. A familiar sight. In my past life, Adam, under Michael's subtle manipulation, had grown to despise Dorothy. He never treated her with kindness, not once. Even when he deceived her into surrendering my shares, he had done it with arrogance, with the smug superiority of a boy who thought his grandmother beneath him. Dorothy had seen it too, yet she gave and gave, smiling softly, never once blaming him. Her love had been unconditional even when it cost her everything. This time would be different. I would not let Michael twist Adam against his own blood again. Michael finally rose from his seat, his expression unreadable, his voice calm, yet condescending. "Mother, our family is fine as it is, don't you think?" He spoke as though nothing were wrong, as though his wife had not just slapped their son, as though Dorothy had not been humiliated by Adam's cruel words. I smiled faintly, but gave him no reply. Let him play his part. I would no longer dignify his performance with arguments. Instead, I arranged for my mother to stay in the largest bedroom of the house, a place of comfort and dignity, and I even hired a personal caretaker just for her. Dorothy deserved more than scraps of respect. She deserved the best I could offer. As for the accident with the car, the failed brakes, I did not rush to investigate. Not yet. I was patient. I knew Michael was planning something bigger. Last time I died before I ever discovered what his scheme truly was. This time, I intended to watch every act of his play unfold, and when the curtain fell, I would be there applauding with cold satisfaction. The following morning, I drove my mother to Westfield Century City Mall, the grandest shopping center in Los Angeles. For Dorothy, who had spent her life stretching every penny, the polished glass, the endless designer boutiques, and the astronomical price tags were overwhelming. She hesitated, her brows furrowed each time she glanced at the numbers. I reassured her gently, telling her to choose freely. At first she shook her head, refusing, but slowly, with my patient insistence, she selected a few pieces, her fingers trembling as though afraid to hold them. When she finally changed out of her worn, outdated clothes into those new garments, her entire presence transformed. Her skin seemed brighter, her posture straighter, her eyes carrying a new spark. Later, I took her to a salon where stylists washed her hair, dyed it a rich chestnut, and curled it into soft waves. When she emerged dressed elegantly and glowing with newfound confidence, she no longer looked like a weary old woman from the countryside. She looked like a lady of the city, dignified, graceful, radiant. All day my phone rang relentlessly. Adam's name flashed across the screen again and again, his calls persistent, urgent. I ignored them. At last I silenced the device, completely refusing to let him disturb the piece I was carving for Dorothy. That evening, as we drove back to Beverly Hills, she sat quietly beside me, her hands folded in her lap. Her head was bowed, her silence heavy. After a long stretch of road, she spoke, her voice hesitant. "Juliette, are you sure this isn't too much trouble for you? I could live alone back in the country. I'm fine on my own. And Adam, he's still young. Maybe you should be more patient with him." My chest tightened. She was always like this, worried more about others than herself, even after being rejected so cruelly. Memories surfaced of when Adam was a child, when he would laugh and run through her garden in the countryside, oblivious to the line between wealth and poverty. He used to adore her, his laughter bright as he picked wildflowers, and begged her to tell him stories. But time and Michael's influence had twisted him. Now he saw only the differences, only the flaws. "Mom," I said firmly, keeping my eyes on the road. "Adam is 18 now. When I was his age, I worked 3 jobs to pay my tuition and support myself. He lives without a care, spends money without thought, and yet he has the nerve to mock you. Tell me, is that fair?" "Should I excuse him for that?" Dorothy sighed softly, her words fading into silence. I knew my reassurance was not enough to ease her heart. The years had dulled her once sharp edge, leaving behind a woman still strong but softened by time. I reached across the console and held her hand. "Trust me, Mom. Please, trust me this time." When we arrived at the house, I opened the front door to find Michael and Adam seated together on the sofa, both staring at us with expressions that could curdle milk. Their hostility pressed against us like a physical force, but I straightened my spine, guiding Dorothy to her seat, my hand never letting go of hers. I motioned for Katherine Lewis to take the shopping bags upstairs and arrange everything neatly. Then I guided my mother to a comfortable seat in the corner of the sofa. Adam, still brimming with the false confidence of youth, wasted no time demanding answers. "Mom, where have you been all day? Why didn't you pick up the phone? And when is Grandma going back to the countryside?" He looked at me with the entitlement of someone who believed the world revolved around his whims. I glanced down at my perfectly manicured nails, as though his words were of little consequence, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his. My smile was sharp, filled with quiet mockery. "Did you not understand me yesterday, Adam, or did that slap of mine fail to knock some sense into your head?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat in a deliberate, heavy sound. His face, usually composed, betrayed his irritation. "Juliette," he said, his voice strained but still cloaked in false gentleness. "Adam is your son. Do you have to speak to him like that? Don't you care about his feelings?" I cast him a sideways glance, my lips curling into a smirk that never reached my eyes. He still fancied himself the master of this house, as if his words carried the weight of law, forgetting that everything here existed because of me. He sensed my disdain and tried to soften his tone, though the arrogance never left his face. "Did you even ask your mother what she wants? She has lived her whole life in the country. Surely this city life is too much for her. You should send her back before she gets sick from the change." His voice was calm, almost reasonable, but I knew better. I knew this was the same honeyed poison he had used before, wrapping cruelty in the guise of concern, manipulating me into doing his bidding. My mother's hand tightened around mine. Her eyes were filled with guilt, as though she believed she was the cause of discord between Michael and me. She didn't realize that the harmony she thought once existed had always been nothing more than a painted shell concealing rot beneath. Adam, emboldened by his father's words, spoke again, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "She doesn't belong here anyway. There's no garden to grow vegetables, no chickens to raise. She'll be bored out of her mind. Isn't that right, Grandma?" His smirk was cruel, his eyes glinting with disdain. I turned my head slowly, studying the boy I had raised for 18 years, and felt an icy disappointment wash over me. How could a child into whom I had poured so much love become someone so disrespectful, so narrow, so selfish? My heart hardened. I let out a short laugh, my voice deceptively light but cold enough to chill the air. "You're right, Adam. That's why tomorrow I'll have a construction crew come and clear out the entire backyard. We'll plant a garden there, vegetables, fruits, whatever your grandmother likes." He blinked, stunned, his mouth falling open. It took him several moments to find his voice, and when he did, it rose into a panicked shout. "Mom, are you insane? You're going to turn our backyard into a farm. How am I supposed to bring my friends over? You want me to be humiliated? You really don't want me in this house anymore, do you?" His voice cracked with fury and desperation. "That's right," I said calmly, my tone cutting through his tantrum like a blade. "If you can't respect your grandmother, then leave. Tonight." I turned my gaze to Mr. Robinson, who who had been standing quietly to the side, ever watchful. "Prepare his things," I ordered. Adam's eyes widened, disbelief written all over his face, yet stubbornness kept him rooted, unwilling to admit fault. Michael finally moved, his expression tightening, his voice carrying the urgency of a man realizing he was losing control. "Juliette, he's still a child. You can't throw him out over this. Take your time with him, teach him slowly. Do you really want your mother's presence to be the cause of this family falling apart?" I tilted my head back, letting my eyes linger on the glittering chandelier above us, drawing in a slow breath before turning back to him with a radiant smile that cut sharper than any knife. "Michael, did you forget just 5 minutes down the road, your parents live in their own mansion? If you're so worried about harmony, why don't you send Adam there, or better yet, buy another house for my mother? After all, it would still be with my money, wouldn't it?" My voice lowered, each word laced with ice, my eyes boring into his. "And let me make something clear. The next time I hear you speak with such condescension, don't expect me to be polite." His composure faltered, though he tried to mask it with silence. For years, he had survived on my tolerance, mistaking my patience for weakness, mistaking my love for permission to trample over me. He truly believed himself to be a man of power, Michael Bennett, the great executive, when in truth, he was nothing more than a shadow clinging to my light. I remembered how, even when I had secured projects through my own abilities, he had slithered into the spotlight, flattering professors, posing as the mastermind. He wore my success like a borrowed suit, convincing the world it was his. He thought his charm and handsome face were enough to carry him, and I had let him believe it. But now I looked at him with new eyes, and I realized just how small he was. If it hadn't been for Michael's face matching the shallow standard of beauty I once thought I wanted, I would never have allowed him to strut so arrogantly for this long. He now believed himself strong enough to spread his wings to live untethered, but he had no idea how wrong he was. That very night, Adam was sent away for re-education, though not in the way one might expect. The place I chose was none other than the old nursing home, where my mother had wasted away in my past life, that crumbling institution reeking of mildew and despair. Only now it belonged to me. I wanted Adam to see with his own eyes what neglect and cruelty looked like, wanted him to serve and learn humility from the elders he had scorned. If he could not emerge with respect in his heart, then he need not return at all. Society had no need for educated men who lacked humanity. While he adjusted to that harsh reality, I turned my focus to my mother. I enrolled Dorothy in a senior program at the local university, a program filled with retired professors and dignified elders. She didn't need to excel academically. She only needed stimulation, purpose, something to occupy her days, and remind her that her life still mattered. After all, she had once dreamed of learning beyond her youth, and now I had the means to let her fulfill that dream. Each day she grew brighter, her timidity melting away, her spirit blooming like a long-neglected flower, finally given water. Meanwhile, Michael maintained his old habits, disappearing early and returning late, often sleeping on the couch, under the excuse that he didn't want to disturb me. But I knew the truth. He feared I would smell the perfume of another woman clinging to him. It was convenient, really. I had no desire to share my bed with a man who was already secondhand. As he grew colder, Dorothy grew radiant. She embraced her classes, made friends, engaged in lively debates, her entire aura transforming. The timid widow from the countryside was gone. In her place stood a refined, elegant woman of the city, glowing with a vitality that warmed my heart. When autumn approached, Michael announced a grand party in honor of my birthday. He claimed it was a celebration for me, but I knew better. His parties were never about me. They were networking schemes, excuses to secure contracts and flaunt wealth. I had long since lost interest in such displays, and this year, with my mother finally living under my roof, I had no desire to celebrate at all. But Michael insisted, his smile, too wide, too forced, as though hoping to distract me from something I could not yet see. The night of the party, Dorothy stayed close by my side, her presence grounding me as the mansion filled with chatter and laughter. The air buzzed with sycophants, each eager to please Michael, each pretending to acknowledge me only in passing. Then the roar of an engine echoed through the driveway. A red sports car pulled into the garage, and soon after a pair of overdressed figures entered the house. Sandra and Frank Bennett, my esteemed in-laws, draped in jewels and smugness, making their entrance as though they were royalty gracing peasants with their presence. I curved my lips into a cold smile, glancing briefly at Michael before turning my gaze on the peacocks strutting into my home. They floated around the room, basking in attention, exchanging greetings with every guest, yet deliberately avoiding me, the supposed guest of honor. Only once they had exhausted their audience did they reluctantly approach me, their expressions heavy with false civility. Juliette Sandra began, her tone lofty, her chin lifted high. "It's your birthday today, and we don't want to say anything unpleasant to spoil the mood." "Then don't say anything at all," I cut in smoothly, smiling brightly as I looked her directly in the eye. My words hung in the air like ice. Sandra's face hardened instantly, her carefully painted smile cracking. "How dare you, Juliette? Do you no longer know how to speak respectfully? Let me make this clear. Adam is the Bennett heir, the pride of this family. He was just joking with your mother, yet you threw him out of the house. Are you insane? All because of a country woman who's turned this household upside down in a matter of days. Send her back where she belongs before this family is destroyed." Her voice rose shrill and grating, her hand cutting the air in frustration. Frank nodded beside her, his face set in stern disapproval. "That's right, Adam has been cherished since birth. A few careless words shouldn't have caused such drama. Your mother should have more tolerance instead of taking offense. You're making too much of nothing." It was obvious they adored Adam, showering him with praise and gifts on every holiday, never once lifting a finger to discipline him. They saw him as the glue that held their influence together, the grandson who would secure their legacy, all while dismissing me and my mother as burdens. Michael attempted to play mediator, stepping between us with a sigh. "Mom, Dad, please lower your voices. Juliette is incredibly filial. Isn't that what you admired most about her back then? Dorothy has had a difficult life, and she's new to the city. She just needs some time to adjust. Once she's settled, Adam will come back home." His words were cloaked in the same tired trickery, the same subtle insults hidden in soft tones. He painted my mother as a backward burden, an intruder disrupting the peace, a problem that time would eventually erase. I studied the three of them, standing united in their hypocrisy, and I could only laugh silently. After all these years, their strategy hadn't changed. Their sharpest weapon was still condescension disguised as reason. Just as Sandra's shrill accusations echoed through the room, a calm but firm voice rose from behind us. "I heard the in-laws were here, so I thought I should come greet them. But why does it feel more like you've come to bully my daughter?" I turned, and there was my mother. Dorothy stood tall in a deep sapphire dress, the silk draping elegantly over her frame, a strand of rare Tahitian black pearls, resting gracefully at her neck. She looked like a woman transformed, radiating both dignity and quiet strength. For a moment, even I was struck. She walked forward, her hand finding mine warm and trembling. Her voice was gentle, yet laced with steel. "Tell me, what exactly has Juliette done that is so unforgivable that the entire family must gather to criticize her? Speak it clearly so I may understand." Her palm was damp with sweat, betraying the unease she felt despite her brave face. My heart twisted at the sight. Memories rushed back. How many times in my childhood had she shielded me with her frail body, taking blows, taking insults, absorbing every storm so that I could remain safe. I squeezed her hand gently, giving her the reassurance she needed, then released her fingers with a soft smile, telling her silently that she no longer had to stand between me and the world. I turned away from her and faced Michael. Without hesitation, I lifted my hand and brought it down hard. The sharp crack echoed, and a startled cry burst from Sandra before she lunged at me in rage. But Mr. Robinson was faster. The loyal steward stepped in, his grip firm, as he seized Sandra's wrist, preventing her from clawing at me. Guests gasped, whispers spread like wildfire, but Mr. Robinson acted swiftly, ushering the crowd toward the garden with smooth diplomacy. Soon the doors closed, and only family remained. That, I thought with grim amusement, was the last shred of dignity I would grant Michael in his own house. Sandra struggled in Mr. Robinson's grasp. Her face twisted with fury, but I ignored her. My eyes locked onto Michael's, steady and cold. "I warned you," I said evenly, my voice low but resonant. "If you can't speak respectfully, don't blame me when I stop holding back. Tonight I've spared you the humiliation in front of our guests. Next time, don't expect mercy." He tried to mask the flicker of unease in his eyes, but I saw it. I turned then to Katherine Lewis, who had been hovering nervously nearby. Her head bowed to avoid the storm. "Katherine," I said calmly, Have the driver take Mr. and Mrs. Bennett home. This is our family's matter. They needn't trouble themselves further. At their age, they do better to join a dance class at the community center rather than meddle here." My smile was warm, but my words were a blade. "Oh, and one more thing, no one touches the cars in the garage without my permission. I'd hate for anyone to park overnight at some hotel and leave Michael fumbling for excuses later." My gaze flicked briefly to Frank. The earlier bluster on his face dissolved instantly. He opened his mouth as though to protest, but swallowed it and fell silent under the weight of my stare. They knew I held the power now. They knew their status here was nothing without me. Sandra, however, could not contain herself. "Juliette, send Adam back home this instant. You've lost your mind," she shrieked, her voice hoarse. "Bring him back." "Absolutely not," I replied coolly, sinking into the sofa with poise. "Not in this life." Her outrage grew, her words tumbling over one another, but I ignored them. She turned desperately to Michael, clutching his hand. "Son, let's go. We don't need to stand here another second." And Michael, the man who once strutted with pride in this very room, suddenly looked almost relieved. To leave with his mother gave him the excuse he longed for. There was another woman out there I knew waiting for him like a bright wildflower he thought he deserved. Yet he continued to play the role of the weary, understanding husband. "Juliette," he said softly, "I'll stay with my parents for a few days. Take your time. Think about things clearly. When you're ready, I'll return." I leaned back, my head tilted, and let a dazzling smile spread across my lips, radiant and mocking all at once. "Good. Do as you please." The party dissolved quickly after that. Without Michael's looming shadow, the house felt lighter, the air sweeter, even the scent lingering in the hallways more pleasant. For the first time in years, I breathed easily within my own home. In the days that followed, life slipped into a rhythm I had long craved. I drove my mother to her classes, sat with her at lunches, and watched as she blossomed into a woman I barely recognized, confident, serene, captivating in her quiet grace. The timidity that had once shadowed her was gone, replaced with a composure that inspired everyone around her. Wherever she went, people felt at ease, warmed by her presence. "Juliette, don't trouble yourself so much," she told me one afternoon as she fussed with a wrinkle in my dress. The Tahitian pearls she wore gleamed, catching the sunlight, a necklace that commanded admiration. "Let the driver take me. You should focus on your work instead of exhausting yourself." I caught her hand, pressing it to my cheek, my voice playful as a teenager's. "But Mom, I just wanted a little more time with you. I have a long meeting later, and besides, I've been craving your duck soup all day." My tone was almost childish, deliberately, so as though I could turn back the years. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "See, that's just the way it is. No matter how kind you are to a daughter-in-law, she'll never remember. In the end, a child's heart always belongs to her own mother." Her words hung in the room like a bittersweet truth. And in that moment, sitting there with her, I realized that everything I was doing, all the battles I had fought, all the walls I had torn down, was worth it for the simple, irreplaceable bond. A shrill voice cut through the warmth like shattered glass. "A mother-in-law will always be an outsider." Sandra's tone was dripping with venom, each word pitched high enough to pierce the peaceful moment I had been sharing with my mother. Dorothy placed her hand gently over mine, the soft pat of reassurance, reminding me not to lose my composure. I glanced at her, smiled to calm her worry, then turned back toward Sandra with a radiant grin, one that concealed blades beneath the brightness. "Why are you here, Sandra? If you're looking to spar, shouldn't you have chosen a different stage? There are clubs for that." Her eyes widened in outrage, her cheeks blotched with fury. I had humiliated her in front of others, and she knew it. Her gaze swept to the Tahitian pearls at Dorothy's throat, and envy flared in her eyes like fire. Of course, to her it was unbearable. She was the matriarch of the Bennett family, yet here she stood, with nothing but a few tiny pearls, while my mother, just a countrywoman, wore a strand that radiated status and refinement. I only smiled, my voice lilting with the sweetness of false sympathy. "Oh, Michael must not have told you. Our finances have been separate for years now. It's hardly my fault he couldn't afford to buy you a necklace like this." I let the words hang in the air, feigned innocence masking the sting. "Unlike me, I've purchased estates in the best neighborhoods, estates my mother enjoys. Isn't that right, Mom?" Sandra's face shifted between colors, fury and shame twisting her expression, yet she said nothing. She couldn't. Every word I spoke was true. Even the house she lived in belonged to me. Even Michael, the man she still paraded as her accomplished son, was little more than an employee drawing a paycheck. The truth was simple. Everything she boasted about existed only because I allowed it. Watching her squirm in her impotence was almost intoxicating. Frank, however, was more practiced. Outwardly, he stood with his wife, his arm wrapped loosely around her, a mask of support etched across his weathered features. But when no one was looking, he would slip away to send me apologetic messages, each one dripping with contrition and false humility. His charm was legendary, his appetite unending. Even at nearly 80, he pursued young women with the hunger of a man half his age. He had spent years crafting the image of a wealthy, lonely widower, throwing money around, showing off mansions and cars that weren't his, luring foolish women into his web. I almost admired the smoothness of his game. Almost. Sandra, of course, had no idea. And Michael, oh, he knew everything. But to save face, to maintain the illusion of dignity, he helped cover it up. Anything to avoid scandal. I must have allowed my disdain to show, because Frank quickly tugged Sandra closer, forcing a conciliatory smile. Juliette, your mother is simply straightforward, but you mustn't take it too personally. She speaks her mind. Don't let it weigh on you. His voice was gentle, but his eyes flickered with unease. He wanted to divert, to smooth over cracks, to prevent me from widening them further. Seeing you doing so well, seeing your mother thriving, I thought it only proper to keep up appearances, he continued. I even enrolled in a social dance class. Your mother insisted on joining me. We didn't want to be left behind, you know. The act was seamless, his tone rational, his demeanor calm, as if he could charm me into overlooking everything. I tilted my head, the smile never leaving my lips. Rational, yes. Calculated, certainly. Different from Sandra's unfiltered malice, Frank wrapped his corruption in silk and civility. It was why he had endured so long. But unlike in my past life, my mother was no longer isolated, no longer meek and alone. Dorothy had carved out a life of her own now. She had friends, she had her classes, she had her independence. She was thriving in ways she had never dreamed. I refused to let Sandra's bitterness or Frank's hypocrisy dim that light. Still, work called. I had to travel for 3 days, and before I left, I gave Mr. Robinson strict instructions. Watch over my mother. If anything happens, notify me immediately. He nodded solemnly. On the first day, he reported Michael had slunk back into the mansion, trying to coax Adam home. Exactly as I had expected. I told him calmly, do nothing, wait for me to return. But on the second day, the call I dreaded came. My mother was ill. Panic clutched me as I dropped everything and raced home. But it was already the third afternoon when I finally arrived. The moment I stepped through the door, Sandra's voice slammed into me, loud and commanding, barking orders at the staff, as though she ruled my home. In my past life, I had allowed her this indulgence, mistaking it for harmless habit. This time, her arrogance only fueled my anger. The moment she saw me, her demeanor shifted like a snake shedding skin. She rushed forward, seizing my hand as if she hadn't wished me gone just days before. Her tone softened, her smile sickeningly sweet. Juliette, you work so hard. I told the staff to make duck soup for you. You must drink plenty later. I pulled my hand back discreetly, forcing her touch away, and walked past her without a word. My eyes sought only one man, Michael, sitting on the sofa, polished as ever. His suit pressed his cologne sharp. His dark brows furrowed just enough to give him that practiced air of sophistication. His eyes sparkled like stars, his entire persona screaming of wealth and refinement. But to me he was empty. I felt nothing. Not admiration, not longing, not even anger, only a chilling void. But I no longer felt anything for him. Michael sat there, twirling the ring on his finger. His head bent low, pretending to be absorbed in the shine of gold and diamond, while I stood in front of him, fighting the rage pulsing through my veins. Perhaps his old lover was already pressing him for answers. Perhaps my mother's presence had simply accelerated his plans. But in that moment, I saw it clearly. Everything was deliberate. Even Sandra's sudden softness was no more than a calculated maneuver, a distraction to lower my guard, so Michael could tighten his grip on the company and cast me aside. Michael Bennett, I said, each syllable slicing through the air. Where is my mother? He froze for a fraction of a second, then looked up with a bored detachment, as though my words were a minor inconvenience. I had Katherine send her to the hospital. He replied, his tone flat, dismissive. The blood pounded against my temples, the anger threatening to consume me. My voice dropped into something cold, deliberate, and deadly. You had better pray her illness has nothing to do with you, because if it does, you will pay. I turned on my heel, but before I could take a step, his hand shot out, clamping around my wrist with brutal force. Pain shot up my arm, his grip so crushing it felt as though he meant to snap bone. I met his eyes burning with fury, twisted with contempt, and for the first time in years, he didn't bother with masks. His lips curled into a sneer. "Juliette Howard, do you really believe you and your country mother are something extraordinary? Without me, you're nothing. Don't strut around pretending to be a goddess when you're nothing but useless." I stared at him, stunned not by his words, but by the realization of who he truly was. How could I have ever chosen this man? How had I once devoted my youth, my love, my loyalty to him? And beside him, Sandra stood watching with undisguised satisfaction. Her lips curled into a smirk. She even put on the act of a caring mother-in-law, cooing with false sympathy. "Juliette, women should be gentle," she said, her voice dipped in poison. "If you raise your voice to your husband, he might cast you aside. You're no longer young, you've already had a child. Do you really think you'll find anyone better than Michael?" Michael threw my hand away as though it was worthless trash. "Come on, Mom, let's go. Talking to her is a waste of time." I watched their retreating figures, Sandra smug and Michael arrogant, and had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. The fish had taken the bait. At the hospital, the sight of my mother nearly broke me. Dorothy lay beneath the weak glow of fluorescent lights, oxygen tubes strapped to her face, her frail chest rising and falling with effort. The room was cramped, 4 beds jammed into a suffocating space, filled with groans of pain and the bitter stench of disinfectant. She lay there alone, abandoned, fragile as glass. I spun toward Mr. Robinson, my eyes burning with accusation. He bowed his head, shame etched in every line of his face. "This morning I couldn't reach you. I meant to visit, but then you returned so suddenly. It was my failure, Miss Howard." My mother's face was pale, her hair disheveled, her skin swollen and blotchy. The strength she had carried her whole life seemed drained, leaving her withered before my eyes. Guilt slammed into me, suffocating and sharp. I had known the Bennetts were ruthless, and yet I had failed to protect her. A nurse's voice broke into my thoughts. "Are you the patient's daughter?" she asked, suspicion in her tone. Earlier, someone claimed to be her daughter. She took the patient's purse to pay the fees, but she hasn't returned. We were beginning to wonder. Her eyes narrowed slightly. I drew in a deep breath, forcing calm over the storm inside me. "Mr. Robinson, contact the director of St. Catherine's immediately. We're transferring her, right now." He nodded and hurried away while I turned back to the nurse. "Tell me the exact diagnosis." The nurse pursed her lips, unimpressed with my late arrival. Her tone was clipped cool. "She suffered an allergic reaction to food. We got her here in time, but she's elderly and she was without oxygen for too long. She hasn't woken up yet." Honestly, what kind of daughter doesn't even know what her own mother is allergic to? Too busy with money, I suppose. Her words stabbed deep, but I refused to let her see. "Thank you," I said tightly, then set the transfer in motion, calling the police, even as arrangements were made. Dorothy was not careless. She had lived with her allergy to nuts for decades. She knew how to avoid them, how to protect herself. Even a small amount made her cautious. The only way this could have happened was if someone had forced her into it, tricked her into consuming far too much. That night, the police arrested Katherine Lewis at the bus terminal. In a country ruled by law, no one could outrun justice. Still, when I arrived at the station, I could already hear her voice shrieking in defiance from the interrogation room. "Why are you arresting me? What do you police even think you're doing?" Katherine Lewis shrieked, her voice echoing through the narrow hallway. I pushed the interrogation room door open and stepped inside, my face, an icy mask, my gaze landing squarely on her. At once she grew louder, more frantic, as if my presence alone inflamed her desperation. For a fleeting moment, regret stirred inside me. I had hired her because of her polished resume, her academic background, thinking that education meant integrity. I was wrong. The educated without conscience are often the most dangerous. "Katherine," I said evenly, my voice carrying no anger. Just cold authority. "Why are you so agitated? My mother, the woman you once served loyally, is lying in a hospital bed right now. You don't think you owe me an explanation?" She threw her head back and laughed, harsh and bitter. "You're mistaken. Michael Bennett already fired me. Whatever happened to your mother has nothing to do with me. How could I possibly know?" Her words dripped with defiance, but her bravado rang hollow. "You were there when it happened," I countered, every syllable deliberate. Do you think that being dismissed from the house absolves you of accountability? You were the last one responsible for her care. You think that excuse will hold Katherine. I know your son is about to graduate college. You must want him to have a clean start, a future unmarred by scandal, don't you? The color drained from her face, and the confidence she had feigned just moments before slipped away. She blinked, faltering, her lips pressed together in silence. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice measured. I didn't come here today to destroy you. In fact, I came to give you a chance. If you tell me the truth, if you cooperate, I can withdraw the charges. You could return to your life, return to your son without this shadow trailing after you. But if you refuse, the consequences will follow him too. No mother wants to see her child's future shattered. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She slumped back into the chair, her once arrogant posture collapsing into something small and defeated. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, each second hammering down on the room. The air felt heavy enough to choke on. I exhaled, straightening. Very well, if you have nothing to say, then wait for the letter from my attorney. I'll see you in court. Turning sharply, I reached for the door handle. Wait. Her voice cracked, trembling, now stripped of bravado. Miss Howard, if I tell you the truth, will you really spare me? Her pale face betrayed fear, her earlier defiance shattered. I folded my arms across my chest, studying her with cool detachment. It's too late for promises. The only thing I can offer is this: if you are honest, if you confess, I can lessen your suffering. And if your son truly has the ability you claim, then perhaps, just perhaps, I can consider helping him find an opportunity. That's the most I will give you. Her shoulders shook as though the weight of the world had finally crushed her. She sank into the chair, a hollow shell of the woman who had entered the room minutes earlier. The silence was deafening, thick with tension. For a long while, I thought she would cling to her stubbornness until the end. But then, with hands trembling, she lifted a glass of water, swallowed hard, and began to speak in a hoarse whisper. Your mother is allergic to walnuts. She admitted, her voice breaking. She's always been careful. Even if I brought her something, she would only take the smallest bite, never more. So I began mixing walnut powder into her meals, her porridge, her noodles, her desserts. At first, it wasn't enough to do more than leave her with a rash. She grew even more cautious after that. My eyes narrowed, the fury in me barely restrained. Why, I demanded, my voice sharp as ice. Why would you do such a thing? My mother is kind. She never wronged you. I paid you generously, more than the market rate. What possible reason did you have to harm her? Katherine shook her head frantically, hands fluttering as if to deny it all. No, you misunderstand. I never wanted to kill her. I swear I didn't. I only wanted her hospitalized. Just that. I swear, no danger beyond that. I allowed myself a bitter smile. Hospitalized, then? And for what purpose? Who put you up to this? She dropped her gaze, words caught in her throat. Her lips trembled, eyes darting as though searching for a way out. I tapped my foot against the floor, each beat a warning. The seconds dragged by, and finally she slumped with a defeated sigh, the truth tumbling out at last. It was Mr. Bennett, she confessed, her voice barely audible. Michael offered me 500,000 yuan. To you that may be nothing, but to me it was everything. My son is graduating. He needs to marry to buy a house to start his life. I couldn't refuse. He promised me that all I had to do was make sure your mother ended up in the hospital. He swore it would never touch me. He swore I'd be safe. Her words spilled into the silence, a knife twisting in my chest. I had suspected, yes, but hearing it aloud still ignited a firestorm inside me. Michael, always hiding behind others, always manipulating, always using people's desperation as his weapon. Katherine's eyes welled with tears. I didn't want to hurt her. I swear I didn't. Please believe me, Ms. Howard. I only wanted to survive. Her tears fell, but I felt nothing but cold resolve. My voice was quiet, deadly calm. You should thank whatever God you pray to that she's still alive. If she hadn't been, there would be no forgiveness, no mercy. As it stands, you will live with the consequences of your choice. And as for Michael Bennett, my lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. His time is coming, Ms. Howard. You have to believe me. Please, you must believe me. Katherine Lewis's tear-choked words cut into me like a knife. Even though I had already pieced together most of the truth, hearing it spoken aloud ripped something inside me wide open. Rage and anguish collided in my chest, threatening to consume me. Michael Bennett, his schemes had always followed the same twisted pattern. He never dirtied his own hands. He used others. Exploitation was his craft. I drew in a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady, even as my heart pounded. My mother has always been cautious. She knows her own allergies. How did you make her eat so much walnut? How did you manage it? My stomach sank, dread curling its claws inside me. If my mother had already suspected, then she would have been even more careful. For Katherine to succeed meant something far darker had occurred. I prayed I was wrong, that the nightmare I imagined had not taken place. She, Katherine stammered, eyes wide with panic. Her voice faltered, breaking apart, as if the truth itself strangled her. Finally, she inhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging as though she had surrendered to the inevitable. The night you were away on your business trip, Mr. Bennett came back to the house. He told me to leave your mother's room. A few minutes later, his mother, Mrs. Sandra Bennett, went in with him. They stayed inside for about half an hour. When they came out, they told me to take Dorothy to the hospital first thing in the morning. When I went back in, your mother's condition had already worsened. She was struggling, and I panicked. I was terrified. I knew if anything happened to her, I'd never be able to explain. So before sunrise, I rushed her to the hospital. Katherine's voice cracked. She sobbed openly now, clutching at the thin fabric of her shirt, as if it could keep her from unraveling. It was my greed, Ms. Howard. I betrayed you. I betrayed her. Punish me however you want, throw me in prison, it doesn't matter. Just please don't let this ruin my son's future. He's innocent. Her words poured out in a flood of desperation. She wept so hard her body shook, tears falling in endless streams. And yet inside me there was no compassion left. Only pain. Pain for my mother, who had nearly lost her life that night. Pain for the terror she must have felt alone and defenseless. Pain that my absence had left her vulnerable. The image seared my mind, Dorothy gasping for air. Her frail hands clutching at the sheets, fear in her eyes as her body betrayed her. I could barely breathe, my heart splintered with the thought. Still I forced my lips into a thin, cold smile. In that case, Katherine, I should thank you. Had you waited until morning, my mother might not have survived at all. That much I will give you, but make no mistake, you will answer for what you've done. At least you've spared your son the burden of losing you to guilt. I turned without another word, heels clicking against the floor as I left her to drown in her tears. Behind me her cries echoed raw and pitiful. But my fury had only shifted focus. Michael Bennett, Sandra Bennett. Together they had crossed a line no one could return from. And now it was my turn to strike. While I spent my days at the hospital watching over Dorothy, Michael was at his office scheming, desperate to scrape together funds. He thought he was clever, thought he could outwit me, thought he could rebuild his crumbling empire with the very crumbs I allowed him. In truth, I had laid the trap myself, baiting him with the illusion of an opportunity too lucrative to ignore. There was no better disguise than profit, and no better weapon than greed. I instructed one of his most trusted aides, an aide whose loyalty I had quietly purchased long ago, to deliver a fabricated report. It highlighted a golden opportunity, importing seafood from a region contaminated by nuclear wastewater. Rebrand it, the report suggested, slap a local label on it, and resell it in America. Costs would plummet to a third of our aquaculture projects, while profits would double overnight. I knew Michael's weaknesses well, his impatience, his arrogance, his hunger to undermine me, to prove he was more than the shadow of Juliette Howard. The moment he read that report, I knew he would seize it with both hands. And he did. He practically salivated at the prospect, imagining himself toppling the Howard Group's clean aquaculture ventures. He didn't stop to question the risks, didn't consider legality, didn't weigh consequences. He called suppliers, negotiated deals, and before long he had poured everything, every last cent of his assets into this doomed gamble. When he learned the ship carrying his contaminated cargo had set sail, he was euphoric. He walked taller, his smugness radiating from every pore, certain his moment of triumph was close. Watching me exhaust myself at the hospital, dividing my time between my mother's bedside and the company, he sneered, finally daring to voice the words he had long craved to spit out. "Juliette," he said, his lips curling with disdain. "Let's get a divorce." I lifted my head, meeting his eyes with calm detachment. "Fine," I answered, my tone serene, almost relieved. "It's something I've wanted for a long time." He hadn't expected that. He thought I would scream, cry-beg. Instead, we signed the papers swiftly. Adam was already of age, the financial lines between us clearly drawn. The process was seamless, clinical, devoid of emotion. But when I demanded the return of the Beverly Hills mansion where his parents lived along with $50 million in compensation, the mask cracked. Rage contorted his face, tearing through his carefully cultivated charm. "You're insane, Juliette," he roared across the courtroom. The judge, unamused, silenced him. And then one by one the pieces of evidence I had gathered were laid bare: photographs of his infidelity records, of his transfers, and Katherine Lewis's damning testimony. Michael Bennett's world collapsed around him, his fury sputtering into stunned silence. The ruling was clear. The mansion was mine. The compensation was mandatory. Michael was left with nothing but humiliation and the faint, foolish hope that his poisoned ship would bring salvation. As he stalked past me, his jaw clenched, his voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Juliette Howard, when that shipment clears customs, don't come crawling to me. Don't you dare beg." I smiled, a cold, sharp curve of my lips. "Oh, Michael," I thought. "By then you'll be the one on your knees." 2 weeks later, Michael Bennett's grand gamble finally imploded. The cargo ship he had staked everything on was seized at customs. The seafood, tainted with radiation far beyond safety levels, was confiscated and destroyed in its entirety. On top of losing the shipment, he was ordered to pay a massive fine that stripped away the last remnants of his fortune. His dream of becoming a titan of industry disintegrated overnight, leaving him buried under a mountain of debt. When Adam returned to the mansion, the arrogance that had once defined him was gone. The swagger of a spoiled heir had vanished, replaced by something steadier, heavier. He had grown. Mr. Robinson told me the residents at the nursing home had praised him as polite and considerate, a far cry from the selfish boy I once slapped across the face. "Now do you understand why I once sent you there?" I asked quietly. He bowed his head, voice thick with regret. "Mom, I was wrong before. I was foolish. I hurt you and I hurt Grandma, but I've learned. Please don't bring up the past anymore. I want to be someone you're proud of." My smile was small but genuine as I gestured for him to take his bags upstairs. Yet just as Adam disappeared down the hall, shouts erupted at the gate. Sandra Bennett's shrill voice rang out. "It's not that they won't let me in. It's Juliette who barred me. This is my family's home, not hers." Her face was blotched red with rage, but the moment she saw Adam, her fury shifted into manic delight. "Adam, my precious boy, my darling grandson, Grandma came to see you." Adam turned to me, his tone unexpectedly calm, measured, even heavy. "Mom, I heard from Mr. Robinson about the divorce. Let me speak with Grandma. I'll convince her not to stir trouble anymore." I studied him, this boy, who had once been so easily swayed, now standing on the precipice of manhood. I nodded, letting him choose. Sandra straightened as Adam approached, her voice rising in haughty triumph. "See, you can't keep me out. Adam is the rightful heir to the Howard Group, and I am his grandmother. Do you think he will ever abandon me? Watch and see." But when Adam finally spoke, his voice cut like ice. His features, so like his father's, were stripped of warmth. "Grandma, you say you're my grandmother, but why have you made my mother suffer all these years? What has she ever done to you except succeed where Dad failed? Is that what you can't stand?" The color drained from Sandra's face, her self-assurance faltering. She had expected her grandson's protection, not his condemnation. Her lips quivered, eyes welling up with tears, until she burst into sobs. "Adam, your father is drowning in debt. Creditors are chasing him everywhere. He won't survive without you. He's your father, the man who gave you life. If you don't help him, who will? It's all your mother's fault. She's the reason he's fallen so low." But Adam only laughed bitterly, the sound void of humor. "Grandma, have you forgotten I'm not his only child? There's another woman out there, and she's carrying his baby. Why don't you go ask them for help?" Sandra's tears became a torrent, her sobs desperate, but Adam's gaze remained cold. "You all could have wronged me, insulted me, and I might have forgiven you, but you hurt my grandmother. She's still lying in a hospital bed, and none of you deserve forgiveness." He turned and walked away, leaving Sandra's wails and curses behind him. Michael, meanwhile, fell deeper into ruin. Bankrupt, hounded by loan sharks, his family crumbled. The once proud Bennett trio were nothing but rats scurrying in the alleys of a city they once looked down on. I never pressed charges for what he did to my mother. Prison would have been too simple, too merciful. No, I wanted him to live broken, humiliated, crawling like an insect through the very society he once sought to dominate. One day, outside the headquarters of my company, I saw him again. The man who once wore Armani suits and Rolex watches now knelt in filthy clothes, his face gaunt, his beard unkempt, his skin gray and rough. The bustling crowd flowed around us, barely sparing him a glance. Juliette, he sobbed, clutching at my feet. I was wrong. I was worse than an animal. Please forgive me. Let's start over. I'll obey you. I'll beg your mother for forgiveness. I'll do anything. Please, Juliette, please. I stared down at him, my expression utterly void of sympathy. He was a stranger to me now, nothing more than refuse on the street. Security, I said coldly. I've told you before, don't let stray dogs or cats wander into my building. They dragged him away, tossing him onto the pavement like garbage. Not long after I heard he had been sold off by his creditors to the northern borderlands, smuggled into Myanmar like livestock. As for Frank, his gilded facade crumbled quickly. No longer protected by wealth or family status, he was beaten nearly to death for his sordid affairs with desperate women. With no money for treatment, he succumbed to his injuries, quietly forgotten by the very people he once deceived. Sandra, though, clung to her madness. One day, she stormed into St. Catherine's Hospital, her once coiffed hair now a filthy tangle, her clothes stained and foul. In her hand she clutched a butcher's knife, her eyes wild, her screams echoing. Juliette Howard, you stole my son's life. I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you. But before she could come within striking distance, security overpowered her, wrenching the blade from her grasp and twisting her arms behind her back. From the hospital garden, I sat with my mother in her wheelchair, watching the chaos unfold from a distance. Dorothy had only just awakened 3 days earlier, still weak, still fragile, but alive. Together we watched as Sandra was dragged away, shrieking like a lunatic, a pitiful shell of the arrogant matriarch she once was. I turned back to my mother, pushing her chair slowly along the path, the late sun glinting off her silver hair. Warmth filled me, chasing away the shadows of the past. Having her by my side was enough. It's good to still have you here, Mom, I whispered. And in that simple truth, I found peace. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.